Imagine inheriting your uncle's quiet 20-acre farm at 35, only to wake up to bulldozers and an HOA president claiming she owns your land for a secret private cargo airport worth millions. What would you do if you discovered the one legal loophole that could save your home and expose a corrupt scheme threatening your entire community? Before we begin, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss stories like this. The phone rang as I was making dinner. "Ms. Reynolds, I'm sorry to inform you that your Uncle Derek has passed away." I dropped my wooden spoon, splattering tomato sauce across my new white kitchen tiles. "Uncle Derek was my last living relative. He left you his entire estate," the lawyer continued, "including the 20-acre farm outside Meadowvale Heights. I never expected to own farmland at 35. I work in marketing, for goodness sake. I barely keep my houseplants alive." But the next day, as I stood on that sprawling property with its weathered red barn and endless fields, something inside me shifted. "Your uncle refused every offer to sell," the lawyer explained, handing me a thick folder. "Even when they built Sycamore Gardens right next door." Sycamore Gardens, the fancy neighborhood where I'd bought my townhouse last year. The irony wasn't lost on me. "These are the property deeds, water rights, and boundary maps," he said. "Derek was very particular about keeping these organized." That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on my back porch, staring at the distant silhouette of my new barn against the starlit sky. The farm, my farm. What would I even do with it? My doorbell rang at exactly 7:30 the next morning. I opened it, still in my pajamas, to find a woman with perfectly styled silver hair and 3 men in expensive suits standing on my doorstep. "Sarah Reynolds." The woman's smile was tight, practiced. "I'm Eleanor Watson, president of the Sycamore Gardens Homeowners Association. May we come in?" Before I could answer, they swept past me into my living room. Eleanor perched on the edge of my couch like she was afraid to touch it. "We understand you've inherited Derek Reynolds's property," she said, opening a leather portfolio. "We'd like to make you an offer." One of the men, introduced as Harold Freeman from the town council, slid a document across my coffee table. "We're prepared to offer you $750,000 for the entire parcel." I nearly choked on my coffee. "That's less than half what it's worth." Eleanor's smile didn't waver. "Your uncle let that land go to waste for years. We're being more than generous." Something about her tone made my skin crawl. I'd dealt with enough pushy executives in my career to recognize the tactic. "I need time to think about it," I replied calmly. Eleanor stood abruptly. "We don't have time, Sarah. The Sycamore Gardens Regional Airport project begins next week." "Airport?" I felt like I'd been slapped. "What airport?" "The board voted unanimously last month," she said, as if explaining to a child. "Your uncle's farm is the final piece we need for the runway extension." A plane roared overhead, flying much lower than seemed normal. "That's my property," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "You can't just build on it." Eleanor's smile turned cold. "Actually, we can. Check your HOA agreement. Section 47B. All properties adjoining Sycamore Gardens fall under our expanded jurisdiction for community improvement projects." She handed me a blue folder. "Our final offer expires tomorrow at noon. Be reasonable, Sarah. You don't want to fight the entire community on this?" After they left, I called in sick to work and drove straight to my uncle's farm. Construction vehicles were already lined up along the road. Workers in yellow vests were placing survey stakes in my fields. I parked my car and marched toward them, waving my arms. "Hey, what are you doing?" A worker looked up, confused. "Ma'am, this is private property," I shouted, pointing at the stakes. "Who authorized this?" "We have permits," he said, pulling out his phone to show me digital copies signed by the town council and HOA yesterday. Yesterday, before they even made me an offer. I yanked one of the stakes from the ground. "Get off my land now." The worker spoke into his radio, and soon a supervisor approached. "Ms. Reynolds, I presume? I'm Jack Novak, project foreman." I understand you're upset, but we have all the proper authorizations. From who? Not from me. I clutched the wooden stake like a weapon. Jack looked genuinely uncomfortable. Look, I'm just doing my job. If you have concerns, you should talk to the HOA or town council. I spent the rest of the day calling every official I could think of. The town clerk seemed sympathetic, but said all permits were in order. The county commissioner never returned my calls. The one lawyer I reached quoted a retainer fee that made my stomach drop. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by Uncle Derek's paperwork, feeling utterly defeated. How could they do this? How could it be legal? A knock at my back door startled me. Through the glass, I saw an older man with gray hair and bushy eyebrows. I recognized him as my neighbor 2 doors down. "Ms. Reynolds," he said when I cracked the door open. "I'm Damon Harris. I saw what happened at your farm today." "You mean when I made a fool of myself yelling at construction workers?" I asked bitterly. "When you stood up to Eleanor Watson's bulldozers," he corrected. "May I come in? I think you need an ally." Damon, it turned out, was a retired judge who'd been watching Eleanor's schemes for years. "She runs the HOA like her personal kingdom," he explained, examining my uncle's papers. "Her husband owns half the commercial real estate in town, and her son-in-law's construction company just happens to win every development bid." "But an airport?" I asked. "That's so extreme." "It's not about transportation," Damon said grimly. "It's about money. Once that land is rezoned for commercial use, its value multiplies tenfold. The noise will drive down residential property values, and the Watsons will swoop in to buy everything cheap." I pushed my hair back from my face. "What can I do? I can't afford to fight them." Damon adjusted his glasses, studying the HOA agreement Eleanor had left. "Every legal strategy has a weakness," he murmured. "We just need to find Eleanor's." We worked past midnight, digging through every document. I was ready to give up when Damon pulled out an ancient property survey from Uncle Derek's files. "Sarah, look at this," he said, voice suddenly animated. "The property line doesn't match current county records." I leaned over to look. "What does that mean?" "It means," Damon said, eyes twinkling, "that we need to check the original deed against the HOA incorporation documents." 3 hours and 2 pots of coffee later, we found it, a tiny detail buried in 40 years of paperwork. When Uncle Derek bought the farm in 1978, the previous owner had joined the newly formed HOA, but Derek had never signed the updated agreement when the HOA expanded its jurisdiction in 1995. "The HOA has no authority over your land," Damon whispered, hands trembling with excitement. "Eleanor's entire airport project hinges on a document your uncle never signed." Just as dawn broke across my kitchen window, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Eleanor bribed the county inspector. Airport isn't up to FAA safety codes. I have proof. Meet me at the old mill at noon. Come alone." "Marcus?" I stared at Damon, heart pounding. "Who's Marcus?" "Eleanor's former assistant," he replied, face grim. "He was fired last month after questioning some financial discrepancies. If he's reaching out, this could be bigger than we thought." The old mill stood at the edge of town, its weathered wooden walls slumping toward the river. I parked my car behind a cluster of trees and checked my phone again. No more messages from the mysterious Marcus. "Hello," I called, pushing open the creaking door. Dust particles danced in the sunbeams streaming through broken windows. "Anyone here?" A shadow moved in the corner. A man stepped forward, thin, nervous, with darting eyes and rumpled clothes. "Ms. Reynolds?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm Marcus Dawson. Thank you for coming." "You said you have proof about the airport?" I asked, staying near the door. Marcus glanced anxiously out the window before pulling a USB drive from his pocket. "I worked for Eleanor Watson for 3 years. I handled all the HOA paperwork, including the airport project." He handed me the drive with shaking fingers. "It's not just an airport. It's a private cargo terminal for her husband's shipping company. The environmental impact study was completely falsified. They bribed safety inspectors. The runway design violates at least 6 FAA regulations. My mind raced. If that's true, it's not just unethical, it's criminal. Eleanor has half the town council in her pocket, Marcus continued, pulling out more documents. These are copies of emails between her and Councilman Freeman discussing how they'll split the profits from property devaluation. Why are you showing me this? I asked, suspicious of his motives. Marcus looked down. I helped them at first. I didn't ask questions when Eleanor told me to backdate documents or adjust meeting minutes. But then I found out they're planning to drain the protected wetlands on the east side of your property. Home to endangered frogs found nowhere else in the state. You care about frogs? I couldn't hide my surprise. My daughter does, he replied, voice cracking. She's 8, loves amphibians, wants to be a biologist. How could I face her knowing I helped destroy something she loves? His raw emotion convinced me. I tucked the USB drive into my pocket. What happens now? I asked. There's an emergency HOA meeting tonight at 7, Marcus said. Eleanor's announcing the final timeline. She doesn't know we've discovered your uncle never signed the jurisdiction agreement. When I returned home, Damon was waiting with more news. He'd enlisted his daughter, Zoe, an environmental attorney from the city. We can file for an emergency injunction based on 2 grounds, Zoe explained, spreading documents across my dining table. First, the HOA lacks jurisdiction over your property. Second, the environmental impact study fraudulently conceals the threat to protected species. I watched them work, these strangers who'd become my allies overnight. Why are you helping me? Damon looked up, his eyes serious. Because Eleanor Watson has been bullying this town for 20 years. Someone needs to stand up to her. As evening approached, we finalized our strategy. I would attend the HOA meeting with copies of my uncle's original deed, while Zoe prepared to file our injunction first thing tomorrow. The community center buzzed with tension when I arrived. At least 50 neighbors packed the room, some looking curious, others concerned. I recognized Thomas Wilkins, who'd complained about my garden gnomes last month, and Cynthia Patel, whose wind chimes drove me crazy on breezy nights. Eleanor stood at the podium, resplendent in an expensive blue suit, flanked by Councilman Freeman and Jack, the construction foreman. As you know, she began, the Sycamore Gardens Regional Airport project enters its final phase tomorrow. We'll begin clearing the old Reynolds property at dawn. She clicked to a slide showing architectural renderings of a gleaming airport terminal. This facility will put our community on the map, she continued smugly. Property values for homes along the main access road will increase by up to 20%. I couldn't help myself. What about the homes near the runway? I called out. The ones that will have cargo planes flying overhead at all hours? What happens to their value? Every head turned toward me. Eleanor's smile hardened. Ms. Reynolds, how nice of you to join us. I understand you've declined our generous offer for your property. I declined because it wasn't yours to take, I replied, standing up. My uncle's farm is not under HOA jurisdiction and never has been. The room fell silent. Eleanor laughed dismissively. That's absurd. Your property is clearly listed in our records. I opened my folder and pulled out the key document. My uncle never signed the 1995 expanded jurisdiction agreement. The previous owner did, but that obligation didn't transfer when my uncle purchased the property. I handed copies to several nearby neighbors. The HOA has no legal authority to seize my land for any project, let alone an airport that violates FAA safety regulations. Councilman Freeman stepped forward, face flushed. These are serious allegations, Miss Reynolds. Where exactly did you get your information? From the county recorder's office, I replied calmly, where public records are available to anyone who looks. The room erupted in confused chatter. Thomas Wilkins stood up. Eleanor, is this true? Does she own that land free and clear? Of course not, Eleanor snapped. This is a desperate attempt to extract more money from the community fund. We've already invested millions in this project. Cynthia Patel raised her hand. I'd like to see the original signed agreement, please. My husband's a real estate attorney, and he always says jurisdiction requires explicit consent. Eleanor's composure cracked. This meeting is about construction updates, not legal technicalities. Actually, I interjected, pulling the USB drive from my pocket, we should also discuss the environmental impact study that conveniently omits the protected wetlands and endangered meadow spotted frogs on the eastern parcel. Eleanor's eyes locked on the drive, then darted to the back of the room where Marcus stood quietly. Her face turned ashen. "This meeting is adjourned," she declared, slamming her gavel down. But the damage was done. Neighbors clustered around me, examining the documents, asking questions. Some expressed outrage at being misled. Others worried about their investments in the project. As the crowd dispersed, Eleanor cornered me by the exit, her voice a venomous whisper. "You have no idea what you've started, Sarah. My husband has friends in every courthouse in this county. By tomorrow, your precious farmland will be under eminent domain proceedings." "Is that a threat?" I asked, meeting her gaze steadily. "It's a promise," she replied. "You can't win this." That night, as I drove home under a canopy of stars, headlights appeared in my rearview mirror. A black SUV followed me, staying uncomfortably close. When I turned onto my street, it accelerated, pulling alongside me. The window lowered, and I glimpsed Councilman Freeman's face, contorted with anger. "Back off, Reynolds!" he shouted before the SUV sped away. I pulled into my driveway with shaking hands, only to find my front door standing open, lights blazing inside. Had I left it unlocked? No. I distinctly remembered Damon setting the alarm when we left. Heart pounding, I called the police, then waited in my car until I saw the patrol cars flashing lights. The officer found no intruders, but my uncle's papers were scattered across the floor, my computer screen smashed. "They're trying to scare you," Damon said when he arrived, surveying the damage. "It means we're winning." "Or it means they're desperate," Zoe added, picking up torn documents. "We need to secure these files somewhere safe." As we gathered the papers, my phone rang. An unknown number. "Hello," I answered wearily. "Ms. Reynolds, this is Richard Watson, Eleanor's husband. I understand you've caused quite a stir tonight." My blood ran cold. "Mr. Watson, No need for explanations," he interrupted smoothly. "I'd like to meet tomorrow to discuss a solution that works for everyone. Shall we say breakfast at the Meadowvale Country Club? 9 o'clock. Before I could respond, he added, "Oh, and Sarah, bring the USB drive. Consider it your ticket of admission." The line went dead. I looked at Damon and Zoe, their faces reflecting my own fear. "What do I do now?" Zoe's expression hardened. "We make copies of everything right now. Then we call every news outlet in the state." Damon nodded grimly. "And tomorrow we spring our trap. Richard Watson just invited the fox into the hen house, but he doesn't realize the fox brings friends." My hands shook as I pulled into the parking lot of the old mill. Was I walking into a trap? The mysterious text from Marcus could be Eleanor's way of catching me alone. I gripped my pepper spray and pushed open the heavy wooden door. The smell of dust and forgotten grain filled my nose. "Hello," my voice echoed. Marcus, a tall man with wire-rimmed glasses, stepped from the shadows. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool air. "Miss Reynolds, I worked for Eleanor until last week." His eyes darted to the windows. "We don't have much time." He handed me a coffee-stained manila folder. "I was ordered to shred these, but I made copies first." Inside were blueprints, emails, and bank statements. My stomach dropped as I flipped through them. "This isn't a small regional airport," I whispered. "These are cargo facilities." Marcus nodded. "Eleanor's husband owns Apex Shipping. They need a private terminal for their overseas business. The public airport story is just cover." I pointed to a map. "This runway cuts right through my uncle's pond." That's why they need your land specifically, Marcus said. The geography makes it perfect for their runway needs. But why rush the construction? Why not just offer to buy my land properly? Because of this. Marcus pulled out his phone, showing me an email. Their biggest competitor is building a similar facility 50 miles away. Whoever finishes first gets the exclusive government contract. I took photos of everything with my phone. Thank you for this. Why are you helping me? Marcus's face darkened. Eleanor fired me after 10 years because I questioned the environmental report. Said I wasn't a team player. Then she made sure no one else in town would hire me. The mill door banged open. We both jumped. Marcus, your car's outside. What are you doing here? It was Jack, the construction foreman. Just grabbing some old records, Marcus lied. But I could see Jack didn't believe him. Eleanor's called an emergency HOA meeting tonight, Jack said, eyes narrowing. You both should be there. 3 hours later, I walked into the packed community center. Neighbors I barely knew filled every seat. Eleanor stood at the podium in a crisp blue suit, talking about minimal noise disruption and property value increases. My heart pounded. I clutched my uncle's original deed and waited for my moment. Any questions before we vote on the noise abatement budget? Eleanor asked, scanning the room but avoiding my eyes. I stood up. I have a question about jurisdiction. The room went quiet. The airport project is illegal, I continued, walking toward the front. My farm was never under HOA jurisdiction. Eleanor laughed, but I heard the strain in her voice. That's ridiculous. Your property is clearly listed in our records. I placed the original deed on the table. My Uncle Derek never signed your agreement when he bought the land in 1978. The previous owner had joined, but the membership wasn't automatically transferred. It required a new signature. I pulled out my phone and showed photos of the documents Marcus had given me. And I know the real reason for rushing this project. It's not a public airport at all. Gasps filled the room as neighbors saw the cargo terminal plans. Thomas Wilkins, who'd left nasty notes about my garden gnomes just last month, jumped to his feet. You told us this would be a small commuter airport, not a 24-hour cargo hub. Cynthia Patel, whose wind chimes kept me awake all summer, turned on Eleanor. Where are the environmental impact studies? My grandchildren swim in the creek downstream from that land. Eleanor's face flushed red. This meeting is adjourned, she shouted, banging her gavel. You can't adjourn without a vote, someone yelled. We need to see the financial statements, shouted another. Eleanor signaled to 2 board members who quickly escorted her from the room as chaos erupted. I felt a tap on my shoulder. Jack stood there, eyes troubled. They're starting construction tomorrow at dawn, he whispered. With or without permits? I pushed through the crowd toward the exit, hoping to catch Eleanor, but she was already speeding away in her luxury SUV. My neighbor Damon caught up with me in the parking lot. You stirred up quite a hornet's nest in there. I had to tell everyone the truth, I said. Truth won't stop bulldozers, he warned. Eleanor has powerful friends. I drove home slowly, mind racing with what to do next. As I turned onto my street, I noticed a dark car parked across from my house. It pulled away as soon as my headlights hit it. Inside, I double-checked all my locks and called Zoe, Damon's daughter, who practiced environmental law. She promised to come first thing in the morning to help file an emergency injunction. I fell into an uneasy sleep around midnight, only to jolt awake at the sound of breaking glass. Heart racing, I grabbed my phone and crept downstairs. My living room window was shattered. A brick lay on my carpet, wrapped in a note. Sell now or regret it. Through the broken window, I saw dark figures retreating across my front lawn. Too scared to chase them, I called the police instead. Officer Miller arrived 20 minutes later, taking notes with a bored expression. Probably just kids, he said, despite the typed threat. Kids don't typically demand I sell my property, I pointed out. He shrugged. Not much we can do without witnesses or video. As he left, my phone pinged with a text from an unknown number. They're coming for the farm at dawn. Bring help. Marcus. Blue and red lights flashed through my living room as I frantically threw clothes into a backpack. Marcus's warning about dawn was serious. I needed to reach my farm before Eleanor's crew did. I dialed Damon for help, but his phone went straight to voicemail. A glance at the clock showed 4:47 a.m., too early for most neighbors to answer their phones. Headlights swept across my curtains. I peeked outside to see a black truck pulling up. Not Eleanor's people, but Jack, the construction foreman. I yanked open the door before he could knock. "Jack, what are you doing here?" "Eleanor called an emergency crew meeting for 5 a.m. They're bringing heavy equipment to your farm right now." He wiped sweat from his forehead. "I couldn't sleep knowing what they're planning to do." We raced to my farm in his truck, bumping down the dirt road as first light crept across the fields. My heart stopped when we reached the gate. A chain-link fence now surrounded my entire property with bright orange signs every 20 feet. Eminent domain. Government acquisition. "How is this possible?" I whispered. "They can't just take my land overnight." 3 bulldozers and a backhoe already waited inside the fence. Workers in yellow vests moved around them like ants. "Eleanor's husband pulled strings with Judge Thompson," Jack explained. "Got an emergency order signed last night." I rattled the padlocked gate. "This is still my property. They can't lock me out." Jack pointed to a woman in a white hard hat. "That's Eleanor's right-hand person, Margaret. She has the court papers." I marched up to the fence. "Margaret, open this gate right now. This is my farm." She smiled without warmth and walked over, clipboard in hand. "Ms. Reynolds, you've been properly served with eminent domain papers." She slid a thick envelope through the fence. "This land now belongs to the Meadowvale Regional Development Authority." "What authority? I've never even heard of it." "It was chartered last night," Margaret replied. "For public transportation needs." Jack whistled low. "They created a whole new government body just to take your land." I pulled out my phone to call for help, but the signal showed no service. Margaret smirked, pointing to a portable signal jammer on their truck. "That's illegal," I shouted. "File a complaint," she suggested, walking back to the bulldozers. "Construction starts in 10 minutes. Jack touched my shoulder. "I know another way in, through the woods on the north side." We raced around the property line. A small creek marked the boundary where the fence ended. They hadn't finished the entire perimeter yet. We splashed across the shallow water and ran toward the bulldozers. I planted myself directly in front of the lead machine. "Stop! This is private property." The driver, a young man I didn't recognize, looked uncertainly toward Margaret. "Remove her," Margaret ordered 2 security guards. As they approached, my phone suddenly beeped with incoming messages. The jammer must have malfunctioned. I quickly hit the video button and started live streaming to my social media. "I'm being forcibly removed from my own property by hired guards after an HOA illegally claimed eminent domain overnight." The guards hesitated, not wanting to be recorded manhandling me. Margaret stormed over. "Turn that off immediately." "Make me," I challenged, backing away to keep filming. "I'm standing on my own property, which has never been part of the HOA. I have documentation proving it." The sound of car doors slamming made us all turn. Damon's silver sedan had arrived along with his daughter Zoe in her own car. "Sarah, don't say another word," Zoe called, hurrying toward us with a leather briefcase. She faced Margaret. "I'm Zoe Harris, environmental attorney. Those bulldozers aren't moving an inch today." Margaret crossed her arms. "We have an emergency eminent domain order, signed by Judge Thompson at 11 p.m. in his living room." Zoe raised an eyebrow. "I've already filed for an emergency stay with the state court. It was granted 20 minutes ago." She handed Margaret a document. "This property remains in Ms. Reynolds's possession until a proper hearing." Margaret's face darkened as she scanned the paper. "This doesn't change anything. We'll have this overturned by noon." "Maybe," Zoe agreed, "but those machines can't move until then." The victory was short-lived. By afternoon, I discovered my house water had been shut off due to emergency pipeline maintenance that somehow only affected my property. The next day, a parking enforcement officer towed my car from my own driveway for unauthorized parking in a restricted zone, a zone that hadn't existed the day before. Code violation notices appeared daily in my mailbox. My garbage wasn't collected. Internet service became spotty. "They're trying to break you down," Damon explained as we sat in his kitchen, the only safe place to talk. "Make your daily life so miserable you'll give up." "It's working," I admitted, exhausted after a week of harassment. "I can't even take a shower in my own home." Zoe spread papers across the table. The judge granted them another hearing for Friday. "Eleanor's husband has friends everywhere." "We need more ammunition," Damon said. "The legal fight could drag on for months." My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Meet me." New information. Critical. This time we met in a crowded coffee shop downtown. Marcus looked even worse than before, with dark circles under his eyes. "I accessed Eleanor's private emails," he whispered, sliding a USB drive across the table. "She lied to the FAA about the wetland assessment on your property." I plugged it into Zoe's laptop. Photos showed the pond on my farm labeled as seasonal drainage, rather than the permanent wetland it was. "This is huge," Zoe breathed. "That pond hosts protected species, the meadow whale spotted frog. It has special environmental protections." "We can get an emergency injunction," she continued excitedly. "But we need to file before they drain the wetlands this weekend." "How do you know their timeline?" I asked Marcus. "They've ordered pumping equipment," he explained. "Scheduled for Saturday morning when government offices are closed." Friday afternoon, Zoe and I headed to the courthouse to file our emergency environmental injunction. As we drove along the empty country road, a black SUV appeared in my rear-view mirror, gaining speed. "Someone's following us," I warned. The SUV accelerated, pulling alongside before swerving sharply into our lane. Zoe yanked the wheel, sending us skidding onto the shoulder. My head slammed against the window as we spun to a stop. The SUV blocked our path. Two men in dark suits stepped out, approaching our car with measured steps. One tapped on my window. "Ms. Reynolds, Mr. Watson would like to discuss a generous settlement offer right now." "Get in the car now," I whispered to Zoe as the men in black suits approached. I slammed the car into reverse, tires screeching as we escaped down a dirt road. My hands shook on the steering wheel. These people weren't just annoying neighbors anymore. They were dangerous. "Did you see their faces?" Zoe asked, her lawyer calm cracking. "That was Victor Watson's head of security. Eleanor's husband doesn't send him unless it's serious." My phone exploded with notifications. Someone had posted my personal information online, claiming I was blocking essential transportation infrastructure that would bring jobs to Meadowvale Heights. Angry messages flooded in from strangers. "They're trying to turn everyone against you," Zoe said, scrolling through the posts. Classic intimidation tactic. I pulled over, suddenly feeling sick. I can't win against these people. They have money, connections, lawyers. A gentle knock on my window made me jump. It was Thomas Wilkins, the neighbor who'd complained endlessly about my garden gnomes. "Followed you when I saw Watson's goons," he said gruffly. "You okay?" Back at my house, a surprise waited. My porch was crowded with neighbors I barely knew. Thomas, Cynthia, the Rodriguez family from down the street, and at least a dozen others. "We saw what happened on the highway," Thomas explained. "Eleanor's gone too far." Cynthia stepped forward, nervously twisting her hands. "My brother works for the county clerk. The council's holding a closed emergency session tonight to fast-track the eminent domain claim." "But why help me?" I asked. "I thought everyone wanted this airport." Mrs. Rodriguez shook her head. "Eleanor told us it would be a small regional airport, bringing jobs, not a 24/7 cargo hub that would shake our houses and pollute our air." "She lied to all of us," added Mr. Patel from across the street. "My cousin works construction. He says they're planning a fuel depot right next to the elementary school playground. I invited everyone inside. My dining room transformed into war headquarters as neighbors shared information. The Rodriguez family, who owned the local printing shop, offered to make hundreds of flyers. Thomas, surprisingly skilled with social media, created a community page that gained hundreds of followers within hours. Cynthia's church group volunteered to hold a prayer vigil outside the county building, effectively a protest with hymns. "Look at this," Zoe said, examining the eminent domain paperwork Cynthia's brother had secretly copied. The environmental impact statement is missing key signatures, and the wetland assessment is dated before they even did the survey. By dawn, our plan was in motion, while Zoe prepared emergency legal filings. Teams of neighbors delivered flyers throughout Sycamore Gardens and nearby communities. The Rodriguez's teenage son, a talented artist, painted a giant banner. "Save our wetlands from corporate greed." Local news vans parked outside my house as Damon, using his former judge connections, arranged interviews. I felt my stomach twist as I stepped in front of the cameras, but the words flowed naturally. "This isn't about one farm," I explained. "It's about powerful people breaking rules that the rest of us have to follow." By noon, social media buzzed with our story. The county commissioner, feeling the heat, called Zoe directly to express concerns about procedural irregularities. "They're backing down," Zoe whispered, covering the phone. "He wants a private meeting." Just as hope flickered, a sleek black Mercedes pulled into my driveway. Eleanor stepped out, her perfect hair and makeup contrasting with the dark circles under her eyes. "Name your price," she demanded, not bothering with "hello." "Everyone has one." "I don't want money," I replied, arms crossed. "I want my farm and for you to resign from the board." She laughed bitterly. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." "My husband has just been served federal subpoenas," Damon interrupted, walking up my driveway with a thick envelope. "The EPA and FAA are very interested in those falsified environmental reports." Eleanor's face went white. "This isn't over," she whispered, retreating to her luxury SUV. That night, as my new allies celebrated in my living room, Marcus called with an urgent warning. "They're moving equipment onto the wetlands now. They're going to drain it before the injunction. If those rare frogs disappear, you lose your strongest legal claim." I looked around at my neighbors, people who had once fined me for my garden gnomes now standing ready to fight. "We need to go there now," I said. "Who's with me?" Every hand in the room shot up. Headlights cut through the darkness as our caravan of cars bumped down the muddy access road toward the wetlands. I gripped the steering wheel, stomach churning at what we might find. Behind me followed 20 neighbors who just last week had been strangers. "Look!" gasped Zoe from the passenger seat. Ahead, powerful floodlights illuminated the marshy area. Workers in safety vests positioned massive pumps at the water's edge. A bulldozer idled nearby, its engine rumbling in the night. I slammed on the brakes and jumped out, my shoes sinking into soft mud. "Stop right now!" I shouted, running toward the nearest worker. "This area is protected habitat." Jack, the construction foreman I recognized from earlier confrontations, stepped forward with a clipboard. "Ms. Reynolds, I have direct orders. Please leave, or I'll call security." "Call whoever you want," Thomas yelled as neighbors poured from their vehicles. "We've already called the State Environmental Protection Office." "And Channel 7 News," added Mrs. Rodriguez, holding up her phone. "They're on their way." Jack glanced nervously at his crew. "Look, I'm just doing my job." "By destroying endangered frog habitat?" I challenged. "You know that's illegal, right? Everyone here is a witness." Cynthia stepped forward with her church friends. "We're not leaving," she said quietly. "We'll form a human chain if necessary." And that's exactly what they did. Neighbors who once complained about my mailbox color now linked arms around the perimeter of the wetland. Mr. Patel, who had argued with me over fence height regulations, now stood shoulder to shoulder with Thomas, who had once reported my holiday decorations. Jack radioed someone, speaking in urgent tones. The workers milled about uncertainly. "Turn off those pumps," Damon demanded, his former judge's authority evident in his voice. "Now." To my amazement, one worker nodded and hit the kill switch. The pumps sputtered into silence. "You'll all regret this," Jack warned. But I could see the doubt in his eyes. In the distance, police lights flashed. 2 state environmental officers arrived, followed closely by a news van. The officers immediately began taking water samples and photographs, while a reporter thrust a microphone toward me. "Ms. Reynolds, can you tell us why you and your neighbors are out here at 1 a.m.? As dawn broke pink across the sky, a black Cadillac Escalade screeched to a halt. Eleanor and Victor Watson emerged, their faces twisted with fury. "What is the meaning of this?" Victor shouted. "I paid good money for these permits." "Bribe money, you mean?" Damon replied loudly, ensuring the nearby reporter could hear. "The EPA has those emails now." Eleanor lunged toward me, finger pointed. "You stupid, stubborn woman. Do you have any idea what you've cost us?" "About as much as you tried to cost me," I replied evenly. "My home, my land, my peace." Over the next hours, officials arrived in waves. County inspectors, state wildlife experts, even 2 FBI agents interested in the interstate fraud aspects of the case. The environmental officers confirmed the presence of the endangered meadow spotted frogs, dozens of them, protected by federal law. By noon, yellow tape surrounded the entire area. Protected habitat, and no entry signs sprouted like mushrooms. The Watsons watched from their car, faces pale, as their dreams of a private cargo hub dissolved. The next weeks brought revelations that shocked even me. Thomas, digging through town archives, discovered the original airport proposal. The runway wasn't just illegal, it was physically impossible. "Look at these gradient calculations," Zoe said, spreading the papers on my kitchen table. "No plane could safely land on a slope this steep." "They never intended to build a functional airport," Damon finished. Classic bait and switch. 3 months later, I stood in the middle of my farmland watching as neighbors planted rows of vegetable seedlings. The community garden project had been Thomas's idea, a way to share the bounty of the land while preserving the vital wetland area. Eleanor and Victor Watson had resigned from the HOA board and moved away amid multiple investigations. The new board, led by Thomas and Mrs. Rodriguez, had rewritten the bylaws to prevent similar schemes. Cynthia approached, offering me a glass of lemonade. "The tomatoes are coming in nicely," she said, nodding toward where her grandchildren carefully watered seedlings. "Who would have thought?" I laughed. "A few months ago, you were threatening to fine me over my garden gnomes." She smiled sheepishly. "Sometimes it takes a crisis to see what really matters." Damon joined us, leaning on his cane. "What will you do with the rest of the land?" he asked. I looked around at the neighbors working together, at children playing near the protected wetland where frogs hopped freely. The same people who once filled my mailbox with HOA violations now filled my heart with gratitude. "Uncle Derek always said good fences make good neighbors," I replied. But he was wrong. Good neighbors don't need fences at all. In the distance, a family of meadow whale spotted frogs croaked happily in their protected home. The small legal detail that had saved not just my farm, but our entire community.